Welcome. We are here to talk a little bit about building agency for learning. Subtitle, Creating and Growing a Leadership Team. I'm Melissa Uziak, and I have two dynamic partners you're going to hear from. But we're going to get rolling so that we can make sure we're wrapped up and back in the general session for this afternoon to be done for the afternoon. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us and taking your time with us this afternoon. So here's our purpose of this particular session. We just want to think about how we might leverage that leadership team to guide the professional learning in the organization. So we're really talking about blending 1 and 4 together today, and we're going to be highlighting some of what we've learned in our experience through networks and bringing teachers together in networks to learn from one another, and educators, more broadly, coaches and district level, and leaders as well. So we're just going to explore how you might think about implementing very strategically a plan that involves this idea of building capacity and agency. And capacity, we want to make sure we're looking at things through an asset lens, and so we know people have a lot of capacity. So it's really building their agency as well. So it's a both and as we go through this afternoon. Where, as I said, going to connect practices 1 and 4, and then we've got 8 concrete leadership actions that we're hoping you'll continue to think about when you think about your work back in your own context and organization. So here's, we're going to start with a quick inclusion activity, a table talk. At your tables, there are some metaphor cards. So we know we gave you a lot of stuff. Isn't it fun to have like handouts because we're back in person? I love handouts and a good post-it note. But don't take the cards with you. I have those back. But on your table are some metaphor cards. We want you to pick a metaphor that best describes your experience with continuous improvement. So take a look at those metaphors. And this is quick. You've got like 60 seconds to pick one. So be thoughtful. It's a forced choice. You can't go to other tables. What's your metaphor for continuous improvement? You can see I used a metaphor up here of this idea of farming and cultivating and the work is never done. That was my metaphor. Once everyone at your table has a metaphor picked out, go ahead and take a quick spin around your table and share what metaphor you picked. All right, you've got 3 minutes to share your metaphors with one another.
Yours, I think. This one.
All right, so I can hear based on what you selected, we have multiple various experiences with continuous improvement around the room, and that's what this work is really all about. We want 1 and 4 to have an interrelationship strong enough that it's driving that continuous improvement. The word continuous improvement is right in number 1. If you take a look back at your document, your school-wide, center-wide document, and I think that's what we're about. And how does the learning in the organization, particularly for the adults, drive that continuous improvement? So this was the kind of starting prompt for number 1 about leadership teams being composed of instructional leaders, all committed to this idea of continuous improvement in lots of content areas. Our document embraces literacy and mathematics, but the idea is that we're using data to drive that. So we're using our data to inform our continuous improvement. And number 4 is a reminder, just this idea of ongoing professional learning that's reflected in the research. Research in how adults learn, research in best practice around mathematics and literacy. So not haphazard. If you notice the sub-bullets in number 4, every single one of them starts with the word intentional. Right? And that's done by design. We really wanted to reinforce this idea that we have to be deliberate, and Allison pointed us to that this morning as well. So we're going to do one more activity to kind of just get ourselves, it's been a long time, lunch, you're all full. It's been a whole hour. So we're going to dig back in, and as a team, we want you to grab a piece of poster paper and grab some markers that are on your table. And we want you to create, you have like 5 minutes to create a graphic. If you had to take a look at 1 and 4, you can go back into the document, you can just pull those files from your memory bank all the way from this morning. How would you draw the relationship how would you visually model the relationship between 1 and 4? So get creative, get funky. There's poster paper posted around the room. Unfortunately, the walls won't adhere to the walls. So you might have to get on the floor, you might have to get on the tables, but there are poster paper on the doors and around the room. 5 minutes, create yourself a visual. How would you connect the two together?
You are all over.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to pair up with a table and share your visual representation of how 1 and 4 start to live in the same space. So could I have these 2 tables share and these 2 tables share, and then the 3 front ones are going to share. Okay, so 5 minutes to share your visual. 5 minutes to share your visual.
So here you have your leadership team, and we really settled on that idea of ongoing and continuous, thinking about the waterfall. So the leadership team will make decisions from all stakeholders to inform the leadership team, and then keep that process ongoing. So it's kind of a
Thanks, everyone. If you want to give your table mates a wave, a thank you wave of gratitude. Thanks for playing along. One of the things I didn't mention is that we're hoping, even from Allison's session this morning and today, start to harvest some of these ways of getting people into the school-wide, center-wide document and into dialogue and conversation around these. And so Allison gave you some really great examples of traps, and you could do something really similar with those traps with a leadership team or a staff. And same with what we're talking about today. There are some things you can take back with you and hopefully use as you embrace the school-wide, center-wide practices themselves. I'm going to pass it on to Kaylani, and we're bringing you an example of how we have lived into 1 and 4 in some of the work that we have done with the Literacy Leadership Network, and I'm going to let her go ahead and tell you more about that.
All right, so I'm Kaylani, and we're going to start. Some of the work that we're going to draw from here comes from work we've been doing through MESA and MEMSPA, the Michigan Principal Association, with something called the Literacy Leader Network. And that's funded the same way as the funding that supports the literacy coaching. The idea is that literacy coaching is really about building capacity in teachers. And so in order to build capacity in the systems, we need to have something simultaneous working with the leaders in the systems, working with the organizational capacities. We're also going to have, Dr. Dana Gostin, who's coming from Oakland Schools. They've been running something somewhat comparable, a literacy leader network that's not school-based, it's system-based. So they have 19 districts who are working on literacy leadership capacity in something called LEO, Literacy Essentials Oakland. Yes, good. So Dana's going to be talking in a little bit. We actually have one of our schools. So Sue, some of your folks are here, one of our schools in the Literacy Leader Network, Alcona. But we're going to use this as not as an exemplar. It's not necessarily perfect, but as an example of trying to think about these capacities and putting them in place and thinking about systems. Because the goal of LLN, or the goal of LEO, is not about change that's at the teacher level with coaches. It's about creating the conditions around them. And so when we talked about our title, it's how do we work with leaders, whether it's building principals or it's district leaders, to think about capacity building and conditions of success. So we sort of have 4 components of it. Is we always want to start with assets. So really looking at an asset-based needs assessment and thinking about where your strengths are. And then thinking about leadership coaching. So what we heard Allison talk about earlier is, we've got some problems, so let's put all of our teachers in PD. We're actually doing the opposite. Let's put the leaders in professional learning, and let's think about how to build their expertise around supporting the conditions that lead to success for teachers. Inquiry-based professional learning. So we use in this an 8 to 12-week inquiry cycle so that you identify a practice that needs to be improved. Maybe you want to focus on small group instruction. And so we say, okay, in the next 8 to 12 weeks, what are the conditions you can put in place? What's the professional learning structures? What's the practices to improve small group instruction? And we do it not thinking that in 8 to 12 weeks you're going to fix all of small group instruction, but we want to be gathering data, not waiting till often in school systems, we wait until the end of the year and go, oh, we didn't do it. What we want is to really get leaders thinking about, here's how I think I can support my teachers in making these shifts. And then the other thing we ask is, often when we look at schools, we're going to look at a document in a minute, leadership capacities. And my colleague and I, when we were doing research around some of these pieces, one of the things we found is that high capacity systems have no more than 3 initiatives. No more than 3 initiatives. So what we ask, and generally they have 1 or 2 initiatives. Now, when I say that to a district, they're going to go, well, I have a social emotional, I have a second language initiative, we have a math initiative and a social studies and a literacy initiative. I'm like, okay, so I've been an elementary teacher, and actually as recently as last year, I was teaching part-time kindergarten, first grade. So I have been in and out of the classroom during COVID with, little kids who, you have to figure out how to mute them because they unmute themselves to burp into the microphone, on purpose. So, I've been with you in those pieces, but I know is that I cannot keep my head around 5 different things. I know we have all of these. So what we ask is, okay, leaders, how do we make this manageable so that there's coherency in what we're trying to accomplish? And an example might be that I worked with a district where they said, well, we have a SIOP initiative, which is a second language, and we have the literacy initiative happening. And then they had a math initiative. I said, okay, that's just too much for an elementary teacher to wrap their heads around. So what we agreed to is that I was doing the literacy pieces. There was a SIOP person. We worked together. And the agreement was, we focused on shared reading, is that the people working on shared reading, or SIOP, would do it in the context of shared reading. And that the consultant and I, we met together and we co-planned some of our sessions together. So people could see that implementing shared reading by paying attention to some of the practices you want to do for your second language student wasn't in addition to, it was good for all of them. So teachers didn't think that they had a SIOP and a shared reading initiative for the next 8 to 12 weeks. They had a shared reading initiative with different tools to implement it for all the different students. Now that required some work on the leaders, right? We had to get the consultants together. The second language consultants in the district agreed they would only go in and coach teachers during shared reading. They wouldn't go in any other time, so that there was a common approach to it. So an inquiry-based professional learning says in the next 8 to 12 weeks, as a leader, I'm going to build coherence. I'm going to make sure that my teachers have the conditions for success. I'm going to have some metrics of success, not just student achievement, but metrics of success in terms of teacher learning and practice. And then I'm really thinking about what's the implementation support that I can provide. So that's the framework, and the idea is this is the coherency piece. We can't have in a classroom thinking about 12 different initiatives. We should really be trying to figure out how do we make this a coherent, organized whole. And it's really by working with the leaders to build their capacity. So we're gonna, we've got these capacity indicators on the table. And we're going to ask you to just take a few minutes. Now, we know you've been digging into 1 and 4. So, Carrie, over here, you're from Oakland as well.
No, Muskegon.
Muskegon. Okay, so you're working with, I'm going to just give you a minute to explain how you're using these capacity. Go ahead.
So I work with the Michigan Math Recovery leaders in the state, and we meet together, I think 3 times a year as a whole group. And so we have used this document to have them think about their implementation of the math recovery work that they have happening within their schools. And so this has been a great document and has offered teachers and leaders to be able to have great conversation about what's going well, what's next for them, and had allowed them to have really, really powerful conversations and thinking about next steps.
I know I didn't ask your permission to call on you. I just called on you, you know? So what I wanted to share this, so we developed this in advance of the school-wide, center-wide, and we had been working on organizational conditions. But I want to share this as a different lens into it. Sometimes it's helpful to look at, okay, what does it maybe look like? What does it maybe not look like? So if you could think about capacity building and the current work you're doing, pick something, and at your table you're going to talk about, what are we currently doing that fits this? What are we not doing? And then we're going to actually be coming back to this at the end of the session and really building more further those connections to number 1 and 4. So is it clear? You're going to look at the document. Just pick something that here you can share at your table. What am I doing? What are we doing well? And then what might we need to improve on? So we're thinking about capacity building, coherence, alignment, building those structures and conditions as leaders to support the work teachers are doing. Okay, we'll give you about 5 minutes. So some want to share out what they feel like they've done well in terms of building capacity in the system. Some things you've done well. Keep looking over you because you're smiling.
Well, I didn't really share about what we necessarily did well, but I did have an idea, like, it would be really interesting to take this to a school meeting, like where all the teachers are there and to kind of, they want to record it.
She might sing it.
To take this to a school meeting where everyone can kind of go through it and do like a self-evaluation of how they feel our school is and where we are at building capacity in each one of these, and use it as a tool for like developing next year's goals and stuff.
And then as I'm walking over there, so one of the things we do encourage using the school-wide, center-wide, or a document like this is I'm going to show you in a little bit a red to green kind of chart, but creating some consensus around these pieces. So then you decide, and it's quite interesting. So if you think about red to green, so if you put it up, so red is like not really awful, but like we got to stop and pay attention to this. And green is not perfect, but it's like it's solid, it's going, it's a good routine. And then you've got orange, which is just before red, and you've got yellow just before green. It's what I find difficulty is often in the field we use rubrics, and everybody's like, well, it's got this language in a 3, but it's kind of like a 4 here. And so you're agonizing. What you want is a real quick gut check. And you'd say, is it more green or is it more red? So I know it's not like really solid, but it really is in the green kind of direction. Or it's, okay, maybe it's not like, and I go, danger, Will Robin, danger is red. But, orange is like almost there. He hasn't yelled out danger yet. And it's helpful to then work as a team to build consensus. So we've got some tools we've used with our schools, with our leadership teams, where we're doing that kind of creating some common agreements about where we are and then talking about it. And then, like you said, deciding, okay, which ones are we going to work on? And I know Leo with Oakland, they're doing pieces like that too, because you can't work on all the capacities at once, right? But what are we going to privilege? And with the schools, we're often asking them to pick one thing in literacy and one thing in the capacity index, because you're not going to just strengthen your literacy teaching and learning, you're going to strengthen your system, because that's what we're about.
So from a side of our teachers, just knowing the data that they get from their classroom work with the kids, our district has, with our intervention teams and our coaches, we have 3 full data days each year to go over the data during the benchmarking times. We also have mini data days in between then, so that we can look at how things are going, what kind of path we need to take, and it sounds like we're pretty fortunate that happens, because it doesn't sound like that's in every district. So that's something I think we do real well.
And then one thing, of course, is how they operationalized it. I worked with a district on a day-to-day they had, and they had to put their kind of like findings and send them up to central office. And so I asked towards the end of the day, and I said, because I was there kind of to observe, and then towards the end I was going to give some feedback and talk with the leadership team. And I said, so what are you guys going to do differently on Monday? This was a Friday. What are you going to do differently on Monday based on what you've talked about with this data? And the teachers looked at me like I had 3 heads. They're like, well, we don't need to use this. This has to go up to central office. And I thought, we just spent a whole day. And I thought about the money, because this was a very large district. I always think in terms of teacher salaries and how much money that we just spent. How much money on an entire day, on a day-to-day. We had that, but we didn't have the conditions and the culture around making sense of it in ways that improve instruction. And so they did their task and they sent it up, but they weren't going to teach differently on Monday because that wasn't the way it was constructed. So, so when we think about this, I want to what I want you to kind of think about is the stuff we're going to talk about in the next little bit. The kind of actions you can take with leaders or the ways that you can support them are really designed to help them build capacity in their system. So it's taking what Allison said is when we look at student achievement, I don't go back just to the teacher, I go back to the system. And the idea around this is coaching is a critical condition to have to support change in teacher practices. But it's not all that needs to happen. You know, it's important, but it's essential, but it's not all that needs to have. And so we need to be paying attention to those conditions. And that's what this work is really talking about. How do we build agency by building capacity? Okay, let me jump here. So here's a triangle that we use to really think about. So the first piece here is really thinking about coming to some initial agreements. So it's thinking about the system commitments, both in terms of literacy or if you're a math person in terms of math. So we really need to think about improving how teachers understand differentiating for learners. So maybe it's small group differentiated reading. But we also want them to take something in terms of capacity. So in terms of your organizational conditions, so maybe we want to work on that data piece and really thinking about making decisions, particularly around small group instruction, that aren't, we gave them a benchmark assessment in September and then they stay with that group again until January. So how do we gather data that informs how and when we group each other? So we're going to make some initial agreements, and this is the system commitment. This is what we're working on. So like I said with the district, we made some commitments about how in central office they were going to organize this work so it was coherent, it was aligned, it was integrated. So we make some initial agreements, system commitments, and I used to an older version of this. I had images on the side and there was 2 people shaking hands. My father worked for General Motors for 38 years and he was UAW member. So he'd have to attend these union meetings and they're real strict in terms of thinking about agreements. You know, you've probably heard stuff on the news about recent things around contract issues. And I find that both not helpful because what we want to get to is this collaborative commitment, but I also find it helpful to think about it's public. You know, we didn't just here make a commitment of what we're going to work on this year. We collectively agreed to it. And so it doesn't mean I, as the administrator, say, okay, we're going to work on small group instruction. We're going to work on data use. It's creating a process where there's ownership for what we focus on. So it's the system, not meaning central office, not meaning the principal. It's the system commitment for that. And I'm going to keep talking about what that looks like to create a system commitment. It can look like when we create look-for documents, we create key characteristics of the practice, we make sure teachers give feedback on it. And they give feedback on it, and then I say, okay, we're going to close it off next Friday, so I'm going to let you put comments in the Google Doc, and then we're going to talk about them, we're going to make some decisions, but then we're going to close it off because we got to work on this. We'll open it back up in December, but then we're all going to agree that if I disagreed with something, I've shared it in this meeting. Otherwise, this is what we're committing to put into practice. So if you don't agree to it, we need to talk about it now, and then we're going to close it off. So we're making system commitments. And then we're constructing our professional learning system around those system commitments. It's not, well, I have 5 days. I'm going to do a math day, a literacy day, SEL day. It's what are our system commitments? And that should drive. So like I shared with that one district, they had initially a day for SIOP and initially a day for me as the literacy consultant. We had to do a lot more work, but we integrated those. So people felt like this was one thing we were doing. And then the implementation support, often we put coaching there, but there's all sorts of things because if you looked at that list in number 4, they don't just have coaching, they have teachers going in and observing one another. They have learning labs, they have opportunities for book study and conversation. Sue at Alcona, one of the things they've got, they're looking at improving writing instruction. So they're doing a book study, but then everybody leaves and says, here's my commitment, what I'm going to try this week. And then when they come back next week, they share what they put into practice. So that kind of implementation support. And what we encourage is we want to, in that inquiry cycle, you want to gather data all the way along here. So what data or evidence do I have that people really made this commitment? And that they understand what we committed to. What data do I have that the implementation support is actually being perceived as useful and valid? So we often gather data here, and then we've got some here when we do walkthroughs or evaluations. But we're not gathering data on the things we're doing as the system to create the conditions for success. And so that's what we want to really talk about. And then shared agreement is along the side. And that actually came from a conversation with Dana, is that really thinking about initially you agree to stuff, right? But sometimes you don't fully understand what that looks like. I remember when I started doing writing workshop, I had no idea the complexity that I would be thinking about and thinking about mini lessons. But as I went, the key thing for me is I got to go and observe an expert teacher practice in another district. I got a day to just go. And just that day helped me to better understand what it is I was trying to accomplish. So shared agreements are built through that conversation and through that iterative process. I'm going to just do a pause. Could you just do a 30-second turn? What's one idea you're thinking about right now with someone next to you? Do a quick turn and talk. So I'm going to pull us back. Could I have you share what you just I'll ask permission. So I'm going to have Jessie share. She was talking about something that's pretty, what we're hearing around the country about Tier 1 problems. So share that, Jessie.
I think that our building, we've talked a lot about with our literacy math coach, administration, the people, our title team, the people that are looking at the building-wide data, we're noticing that there's more of a Tier 1 problem going on. We focus so much on the Tier 2 and Tier 3, and we're almost now noticing that we're working on what we're calling a Tier 2 issue, but the percentages are showing it's Tier 1. But talking about that system commitment and that agreement of bringing that information to the whole building and letting everyone see the same information that we're seeing, because a teacher is just looking at their own data for their class or their grade level in PLCs. But being able to have that conversation with everyone and allowing everyone to maybe make that observation on their own, that's maybe the next step we need to take and work on, we'd get more buy-in and less defense.
And I think that's a great example of then why this is such a big level down there. So I want you to just think about this. So I worked with a district a little while ago. 60% of their kindergartners were in intervention. And the teachers wanted more and more interventionists. And I said to the district person, I said, you realize this isn't a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 problem, it's a Tier 1, right? And so when they're thinking about their resources, but I'd heard you say earlier, there's a level of defensiveness. If I go in and say, you guys, it's a Tier 1 problem, you're doing bad with instruction. Now, they're not often, if you put them in a group, because it's not that they're doing badly, it's a not good fit for the kids that they have, right? And so what we want to think about, what Allison talked about this morning, is we want to give people the information, and we need to construct experiences. Now, that doesn't mean as an administrator, if you all tell me, oh no, it's not a Tier 1 problem, I'm going to go along with it. What it means is it's my responsibility, if I'm designing the system, to create the conversations, the professional learning, the experiences to help people understand the direction we're going. So it's not if they don't agree to it. But just as we talked about kids learning when they're struggling, we don't want to blame the kids. We want to look at how do we as teachers create the situation. So Allison talked about that. And I love when she said, so if we have teachers who are struggling, what's the professional learning the principals have? So this is the big piece we have to get. In order to have agency, you have to collectively own the direction you're going in. Now, why do people not want to have those conversations that it's a Tier 1? Why don't they just want me to come in, external person, and say, it's a Tier 1 problem, you all have to do that. And that's not how I work. But why is this hard? Yeah, it's vulnerability, it's rethinking how I do things, because there's not a single person probably in your schools who wants to do bad by kids. We do what we know, we do what we think works, and when it's not working, I just worked with a district, I think it was last week, Monday, a week ago, and they'd asked me to come in and support some writing. And the one teacher was very frustrated. I mean, initially, the district had wanted me to create a new writing group. I'm like, no, that's not how we do this. We got to get the teachers. When do you have an institute day? Well, we have one coming up. Okay, well, we got to talk about, get the teachers talking about what's working, what's not working, and then look at the curriculum you've purchased to them and have them help make some decisions. And so the one teacher said, so you're telling me that I'm not just supposed to go with exactly what's going in the book. You want me to make some decisions about it because it's black and now you're telling me it's gray. Is that what you're telling me? I said, just tell me right now, is what you're doing working? Is it working for the kids? And she said, well, no. And I said, so we got to do something different. And we have to together figure out what that different is. And that was very stressful for her because she just wants to teach what's in the book knowing it's not working for most of her kids. But it created a space where her colleagues were like, yeah, so you're telling us, and one of them said, now have you talked to the administration about this? I said, yeah, we designed this together. So we have permission to think about what's going to work, but it's our responsibility to do that too. So the system commitment is about designing it so that it's in place. So we're going to talk through some of these practices, and I realized we changed it. We said we have 8 things for leaders to do. We only have 7. So we really want to talk about the system commitments for a little bit. And we want to kind of talk about them in terms of, I'm going to just start here and then I'm going to turn over to a math example. So I have never been in a school where teachers are not saying they're doing interactive read aloud. Now, how many here are in the literacy? How many here are in the math? Okay, so Dana will be ready for you to talk about the math example. So, but if you look at the literacy essentials, the one that says it's about interactive read aloud, most of what's on there is about the interactive part, like you pre-read the book, you identify vocabulary, you have your modeling comprehension, you have kids turning and talking because it's interactive. And so often teachers are like, oh, yep, I do, they rate themselves really high. Yep, I do interactive read aloud. And then this is a video I particularly like because most of it is not the teacher reading. Most of it is modeling vocabulary, modeling comprehension, having the kids turn and talk. And then teachers will go, I don't do that. So that's that part of building some system commitment and some shared agreement about what it is, and really thinking about those pieces. So another thing we often do is we start with a literacy framework. Everyone is say, well, we teach wonders. We teach HMH. Okay, well, there's way more things in there than anybody can do. So what's the commitment you're making as a school for what are the key components that you're going to teach that support the data that are aligned with the literacy essentials, and really thinking about those pieces. And I put this up, and I'm going to switch to Dana to talk about an example in math for you to talk about. Doug Fisher, Nancy Frey, for those of you who know Doug, he's got a representation of the gradual release model. It's, I do it, we do it, you do it. It comes from research on cognitive theory. One of the things in the school that they work with, their math teachers are not allowed to send home math homework. So this is a middle high school. They're not allowed to send home math homework until they've had 3 days of guided practice work, which is a very different shift from how we think about like a middle school algebra class. Because the idea is they've said their system commitment is we're going to use the gradual release model. What that means is you have to have a lot of teacher modeling and and guided practice before kids should be expected to independently take something home. And the math, I've heard her speak, the math department chair is very adamant about that. And designing professional learning and saying our commitment is we're creating all these experiences. Now they came to that through studying and working together about how to create an effective math learning experience for students. So this section we're talking about system commitments and creating together those structures that support it.
So what I tried to do here was take kind of try to put together a sample of a system commitment that might show up in mathematics. So while Kaylani introduced me with literacy work, my background is mathematics, and I've been part of the task force for a lot of years in mathematics. So one commitment could be that we're going to commit to at least 60 minutes per day of mathematics instruction, not necessarily all at one time throughout the day, but that's part of our commitment. It could be that we're going to hone in on observer-based assessment information so that we're using data that's closer to the classroom to think about what are the shifts we're going to make in instruction. And then to enable us to use that data and to get a sense of if we are able to implement this instruction as we've kind of laid it out here, we'll have some forms of regular school level collaboration as well as district level collaboration as some check-in points. So when I think about my instruction, I might think about components of instruction. So there's maybe a number sense routine that the expectation is that we'll engage with kids in a number sense routine 3 to 5 days a week. That could be part of that 60 minutes. It could be that we've noticed a lot of external resources coming into instruction, and maybe our kids aren't getting some similar experiences. And so as a result of that, not identical experiences, mind you, but similar experiences. And so we are going to recommit to using our primary instructional resource on a daily basis, but use it in a way that's consistent with the essentials. And also being aware that we can make across content connections when we're thinking about engaging with science, when we're thinking about engaging with literacy. And that's all part of our commitment to what mathematics instruction looks like. When it comes to the observation-based assessment, one of the things that you'll notice is there's some work that we need to do around developing some outcome look-fors informed by learning progressions. That's part of essential number 4 in the instructional essentials for mathematics. But then also develop instructional outcome look-fors informed by 2, which speak to the developing robust mathematical identities. Because if we want kids to be able to show us our thinking, they have to feel like they can show us their thinking. And so we're not only going to focus in one space. So we're looking for those connections. And then finally, leadership learning labs, not to monitor in terms of evaluation, but to monitor in terms of being able to say, are we seeing evidence that we're using research-based learning progressions in practice to make decisions about instruction on a regular basis? So that's the kind of thing of what a system commitment could look like. One of the things I really want to come down to here is when we think about, there's certainly school level collaboration, but when we think about the regular collaboration at the district level, we are seeing that there's some content area specific, and up here, as Kaylani mentioned, there's across content. So notice there's a bullet in here about across content meeting quarterly, so that math isn't coming into a teacher and saying, hey, do this, and literacy is coming into the same teacher and saying, hey, do this. Just like the SciUp example that she spoke to, math and literacy are saying, how do we work together to support a teacher around instructional practice? It specifically looks like this in literacy, specifically looks in this in math, but when you look at them together, you can see all these connections. And then finally with the district support is that you have team members that also show up on that district continuous improvement team, so that when we're putting plans together to actually work on continuous improvement, we can see how those 1 to 3 big initiatives that Kaylani mentioned connect back to the very specific work that's happening in our classrooms on a daily basis. The strategies and activities connect up to those 2 or 3 initiatives. So in this model, you'll see that there's aspects for the routine collaboration, building and sustaining professional trust. One of those is through the leadership labs. The number of times that I have heard recently that, in particular schools, not necessarily whole districts, but in particular schools, it may feel like it's not a particularly safe space to have administrators be part of the leader learning labs. So we have to think about what are the ways we're going to build and sustain professional trust even before getting to the lab space. But that's a component of building that trust. Participating in grade level team meetings is a component of building that trust. And so we need to think about, we may not put learning labs into a plan if we haven't built enough trust for leadership learning labs to happen. But then we're stepping back and saying, what do we do? What are the kinds of routines, as Allison mentioned earlier, routines and tools and events and roles that we need to integrate into our plan so that we get to the space where we can engage in leadership learning labs. And then finally, so that we see the spread of the essential practices. In this example, this is just one of the practices, so cognitively demanding mathematics tasks. And I mentioned you might see that we've moved a little bit away from our primary instructional resource. So maybe we're going to re-engage with and recommit to using that resource more regularly, but trying to use the tasks and highlight those tasks that support deep connections to mathematical understanding for the students through the cognitively demanding tasks. So we're actually going to look at a video of this first. So this is one of the early Math Task Force videos.
We're going to use square polydrons and we're going to lay them out in something called a net. And then we're going to see if we can fold up those sides to make a cube. Do you think I can fold up these sides and make a cube? I want you to think about it for a minute. Let's make a prediction, okay? Put your hand by your heart. So everybody show me what you think right now. I wonder if every time I lay my square polydrons out in a net, do you think it will always make a cube? I'm thinking about it. Do you think it would always make a cube? Will you turn and talk?
Shapes can do it, but not like all in that they wouldn't have one this side, so changing it wouldn't be the same.
So first, we have to make our what? Our prediction. All right, take a look at that net.
But anyways, you could tell it was a yes. Because look at we have two more, right? We put that at the top like that. That's okay.
Well, yes or no? Did it make a cube? Yes. Then we're going to come over here and make a prediction. All right, so let's make a prediction about the next net.
I circled one. No. Let me try it a different one. The J does not. Hold on. What happened? Wait. Well, it doesn't make cube.
We were wondering if every net, no matter how we laid it out, would fold up to make a cube.
Some of them won't and some of them will. And you just have to build them to see if they are or if they're not.
Oh, what else did you notice?
Some of the cubes didn't have like faces. Some of the cubes were.
So you're saying when you folded up some of the squares that they didn't have faces on? Where it was open? No faces?
Yeah.
Could that be a cube with no faces there? No. All right, boys and girls, you learned a lot today. You did a lot of good thinking and learning, and we're going to work some more with some other polydron shapes, okay?
So one, I chose a geometry example. We don't often see a lot of geometry in mathematics early on. It tends to be at the end of the book. Two, now you have the essentials for mathematics, the instructional essentials in your folder, but you don't need to get it done. Just take a moment and turn and talk at your table groups about what felt like it could be different maybe than how you experienced mathematics, or what feels like it might be cognitively demanding in that example. Just make some predictions about what you think that might mean when you think about a cognitively demanding task and what you saw in the video. So even without looking at the essential itself, some of you may have some background knowledge of that essential. Many of you, I'm sure, have background knowledge to some extent of that essential. I heard things like kids were talking with one another. They were collaborating. They were making sense of, could this make a cube? They weren't told this will make a cube. Could this make a cube? There was what we didn't see at the end was when the teacher brought them back together and they did some summarizing toward the end and consolidated some ideas. So those would be the pieces of instruction. So you could imagine how being able to go in classrooms, thinking about an essential, and then being able to come back and talk as part of a leadership team, where is our instruction in relationship to the practice that we are currently working on? So that's one way you could think about choosing a focus area and then working on that focus area in a mathematics setting. For this one, this is from Dr. Fox-Resnick's paper that was referenced in the opening session. This is 3 of the 4 columns from Table 2. And you can see how when this educator learning system was put together in this Hilltop School, you can see how there are so many different components. We have a setting, which is ultimately the how. So when you think about supporting the complexity within that the teachers are dealing with and the different things that work for and against our implementation of these essential practices, we think about learning activities that come out in different ways. So that's the setting, the labs, the team meetings, and so on and so forth in that first column. When you look at the purpose isn't to fill those deficits, as Allison spoke to earlier. The purpose is about experimenting, trying things out, engaging in collective inquiry. So the purpose is in a space of powerful learning for teachers so that we have powerful learning for kids. And then finally, for the participants, it's not just the coach and the teacher all the way through this, or teachers, but you'll see some different staff members, including principals. And some of our teams that we work with, we've included central office participants regularly engage in some of the leadership learning labs, and it's been a really phenomenal experience. Because it supports it, just like we talk about deprivatizing classroom practice, it actually deprivatizes leadership practice. When teachers and coaches and building level administrators and central level administrators are engaged in some of these labs together. So that's another example. And then it goes back over to Kaylani.
So the idea here is we want you to focus on not what the teachers are doing, but what the system's doing to create those agreements. So I want to think for a little bit about kind of professional learning that supports these kind of shared agreements. So one of the pieces, these come from 2 schools we're working with. I think this was Carrollton and this is one of Traverse City. This was focused with small group instruction. So part of this is really getting clear. I mean, small group instruction, phonemic awareness, phonics, there's so many different components, but getting clear together as a school, as a district, teachers to central office, principals, what is it that we're really what are the look-fors? That comes from an ASCD article on power tools look-fors. But what is it we're going to look for in our own practice? What are the key characteristics? Now, there may be 50 characteristics, but we're going to coach into, we're going to do PD into, and as teachers, that's that shared agreement piece. I said, we're opening up the look-fors, let's give feedback, and we do it in a way that everyone has ownership, and they kind of, some schools I've even had them sign it. I agree that this is good enough for now. It's not perfect, but I'm agreeing this is what I'm going to hold myself accountable to. I'm going to self-assess. I know that I'm going to be coached into, and then the building principal or the district says, my commitment to you is to give you all the professional development you need to put these into practice. I've said to principals, and you can always tell which principals have been in the classroom recently. I say, principals, I know it's hard to get subs. I want you to tell your teachers you are committed to going in and covering their classroom so that the teachers could go in and observe one another. And you'll see some of the principals go, I'm sure I can find a sub. So the goal is, though, and then this is that self-assessment I talked about. You can do it as a team. You can do it as an individual, but it's green. It's pretty strong. Red, danger. So, and then deciding where you want to be at. But the goal is to be clear again, what is it we're looking for? What am I going to design my professional learning? And we're agreeing on that together. The other piece I often do is we'll say what we want you to do is that every teacher in your school needs to observe and be observed by someone they feel safe with. So the principal might say, it's a non-negotiable that you're going to be observed by a peer. It's a non-negotiable that you're going to go observe. We're going to make that space for you. Who observes you? What you do with that conversation is up to you. We're just going to create the space because we want to start deprivatizing practice. So if you want me to do it, if you want your best friend to do it, if you want the coach to do it, that's up to you. But we want to start creating that space for conversation. So what's not negotiable is that we're going to look at each other's practice. What's negotiable is who and how we construct that. And then this is from Pinckney. So I'm going to have Melissa talk about how they created their look-fors in their professional learning.
So I have had the honor of working with 2 and now 3 schools in Pinckney Community Schools, part of Livingston County, small district, but they are part of our Literacy Leadership Network. And I think the point I really want to make is these are great examples. It's so much more about the process, right? It's so much more about the process than the product. So I would just lean into that idea. Another thing I wanted to also mention, if you look here, if you went back to the first time you saw this list, you're going to notice that shared agreements is bolded with this idea of systems commitments. But I also bolded it here where we think about this idea of professional learning. So it ends up connecting really vertically throughout your whole organization, this work that we're bringing to you today. So this is on your tables, there's a 2-pager back and front. It's highlighting Pinckney as a case study as part of one of our groups and teams in the LLN work. And so again, this is just one example of how they have embraced this idea of committing as a system to the work. They were focusing on literacy the last couple of years, but I can tell you that they are finding such benefit in the process that we're supporting them and coaching them around, that they're going to be using so much of this in their work around math and their work around science. Those are their next areas, content areas they really want to lean into. So you'll see, I took a couple excerpts from here and put them on the slide, but you can take a look at kind of how they have approached this work. So they created a systems agreement that they were going to work on this together collaboratively as actually 2 schools that have the same grade levels. They actually work, all their leadership team meetings are together across the 2 schools. So when you talk about ensuring that students have equitable opportunities across a system, all their leadership team meetings are together. They're 2 leadership teams. So they followed practice 1 of the organizational practices and how they developed their teams, and then they're collaborating across the 2 schools. They created shared agreements that they would commit to. They chose instructional time, literacy instruction, spelling patterns, red word lists, and handwriting as areas to have really specific shared agreements. So this is just an example of some of that. They also use those shared agreements to create an inquiry cycle. So this is where we're getting into the professional learning. And so they took those shared agreements and they created opportunities to go into those spaces. So again, in number 4, you'll see lots of opportunities. Coaches were part of this, but also this idea of peer observation and a chance to get into those learning labs. There's lots of ways you can structure it, but the idea is that the shared agreements drove what they were going to be looking for when they went into each other's spaces, those safe spaces with a partner. And they were really focused on classroom practices 4 and 5 around phonics and phonemic awareness. So they have all been through the very extensive Orton Gillingham learning. And I would say Orton Gillingham isn't probably even as intensive as letters, but some of you that are experiencing something similar, right? To give a common approach to teaching phonics and phonemic awareness. But it didn't just end with that intensive training, right? They're now carrying it over into their learning spaces as adults, and they're creating their shared agreements and their look-fors and their inquiry cycles around these pieces. And so I just wanted to share this as just another example of the power of when you can really create that interrelationship between 1 and 4 and some of these different like leadership actions that we're talking about today, the work is just so powerful.
So one of the things I wanted to just reference is that number 4. So again, if you think about your professional learning resources, whether it's coaching, whether it's your institute days, whether it's your staff meetings, is that really thinking, okay, there's no like evidence-based research that says 80% is but it's one of the things I often go, in your gut are most of your resources oriented around your focus area for the next 8 to 12 weeks. And if you say, well, we have a social and emotional learning initiative and we have a writing initiative. So often what I end up seeing, I go into the classroom, is I see a little kid having a meltdown because I can't write. And I saw a little kindergartner, he's like, I can't write. And it was like this trauma, he was screaming, I can't write. And then later in the day, they have their social emotional learning time. So, what I want to look at is how do we construct our writing time using the tools and strategies so we know that choice, giving kids choice, for him, he actually has some fine motor difficulties. I went and got him a whiteboard and a marker, happy as a little clam. It was the little lines on the paper and the little pencil, but giving kids choice, thinking about also having where you do a turn and talk, or you're talking before you write. If it's a silent classroom, we think about what are we learning in our social emotional piece and times and our PD that helps us think about writing instructions. So let's make that one conversation. So 80% of our time should be helping us advance the thing we've committed to. And then when we think about the implementation support, really what we want to think about, I heard, how was it this morning? So it's on your little laminated sheet. So the idea is how principals conceptualize teacher change influences the way they design professional learning and their expectations around a change initiative. And the way we often think about it is usually what I see is people say, I'm going to principal, just maybe they don't say it, but it's how they've designed it. I put everybody in PD 2 days in August before school began, and then they're all going to do it, and I'm going to have a coach available to support them. But, that's actually not what the research says change it takes. It also is not my experience. Okay, I'm going to do what I think is best for my kids. And your 2-day workshop did not convince me. I know how to do it. I feel confident in it. It's going to work for my kids. So we want to look at that kind of laminated page and talk about this. So this is what the research says and what I know from my own life.
And so when we think about this messy trajectory that we go through, at the beginning, we start here and when we're first kind of interacting with something, and we actually might feel a little bit of resistance to it. And that's actually okay. We want to honor the fact that we might not be sure about this. There's some things we're doing that are working, and we're not necessarily sure about what we're walking into. But it's through all these little things along the path of that messy trajectory and those conceptions of learning that are set up by the leadership team that designs that professional learning and thinks about what are really the goals for that professional learning, that we create these spaces. Some are more formal, some are less formal. Allison talked about the roles, the events, the routines, but they're along the way of that path. And it's through that work that we maybe move into a space where we're not so resistant. We're trying stuff out. And we might be kind of robotic in the way we try things out, but we're trying stuff out. And then as we move through this, we move to the place where things are really starting to make sense. We're bringing in our own values into the work. We're bringing in not just our own values, but we're building shared norms and values around the work that we're doing together. And we're being able to not just go through the motions, let's say, of that number sense routine, but we're able to work on that number sense routine with kids where they're seeing the value of listening to one another, getting ideas, seeing themselves, seeing the kids are seeing themselves as part of the community, because we're not facilitating it any longer in that robotic manner, but it's become something that's internalized and it's part of our classroom community. So just kind of coming back to this and realizing that we go through this, we all enter this in different places, depending on what our past experiences is with whatever the context is, but that there are things that we can do along the way, and they're not all identical, and some are bigger, some are smaller, so that supports the learning of the individuals and units of individuals, whether that's grade level teams, whether that's schools, whether that's district teams moving through this.
So if you look at the chart, you'll see the one before it mentions that resistance and compliance is part of the phase of the journey. So for some teachers, and I have at times been one of those, when we think about sort of that's where that system commitment comes into place, though. So a school district that I'm working with that's near here, they made a decision we're going to focus on small group instruction. It was really novel to them because the curriculum they've been using had been all whole group instruction, or if it was small group, it was just breaking kids up heterogeneously. You wouldn't like pull kids because they need these. So the idea of differentiated small groups was novel. We went through this process though of talking about it, looking at the research, doing PD around it, and then creating those agreements. We're all going to put this in place. We've got additional coaching support. We've got additional PD that's optional. We've got a lot of resources available to support you, but we're all agreed we're going to do this. And then, there was like a month into the school year and there was a teacher who wasn't doing it. And she's like, I can't do this. This is not going to work for my students. And then we're looking at the data with the other kids, but this is where, so there was some resistance, but it's like, but we agreed to this, and this is where the building principal can't just leave everything to the coach, because otherwise there's some teachers who don't want to be coached. So we agreed to this, and so what support is the principal can I give you, because we're going to do this. So can I come in and do some planning with you? Do you need some release time to go into other, because we're going to do this. This is the commitment we made. How can I support you in doing this? Now, the next place you see is they kind of bought into it, because what you saw within, when we looked at her data in December, she was kind of pushed. She was astounded at the growth she saw in her students. Now, at this point in the string, you would think that she invented this concept. It's like, yes, I'm so glad you brought this to us. So she was very resistant. We approached it not as a behavior problem, but as a, how can we support you? But we are doing this because this is what we committed to. And now she has seen the growth in her students, and she's excited about it. And I've seen that over and over and over in school systems. But if we leave it just, if we don't understand that we have to sometimes encourage, we have to sometimes provide additional support, but this is where we're going. So those are some of the pieces. Yeah, if you could click on that. Yeah.
I think so. We showed you all those different models of what it might look like: literacy examples, mathematics examples. And it's not to say that there's one right example up there that's the right thing to go back and take back. It's that process piece that Melissa spoke to, and we've been coming back to. Going through that process, thinking about what it is that gets you into the space to make those commitments so that you move into the operationalization of those commitments in a way that's supportive and isn't feeling like everything's coming at you from a separate place. How are we going to work on this together, and how are we going to work in it in a way that feels like there's a level of coherence to the work that we're doing together?
Yes, because I will give you every look-for I've ever developed, every rubric, but I'll give it to you in Word, because I don't want you imposing it on your teachers. You're going to open it up in a Google Doc, and you're going to say, how are we going to modify it? So if you take something from someone else, take it as a place to start, not the place we're going to, because we're building agency and ownership. And I always give my stuff in Word documents or Google Docs, because I do not ever want my name on something that has been imposed on other people. I want them to work their way and own it. So here's an example of an implementation plan. So when we work on those inquiry cycles, developing an implementation plan. And so this district wanted to focus on small group differentiated reading, high quality literacy centers. Now this process is pretty common. I'll have this distributed leadership team. So it's got some teachers, some principals, some district folks, the literacy coach, and they say, this is what we want to do. And they'll always give me the date by which they want the teachers to have done it. And so this was like a 1st of October. And I said, so what are you going to do to make that happen? And it was like this, what do you mean, what are we going to do? I said, what are the conditions you're going to, well, we got a coach. Okay, so, well, let's talk about that. I said, and this was like, wasn't this like a week or two before, just before school started? Because they said, well, they have to do, I said, so how are they going to know how to put them in groups? And they said, well, we do the BAS. And I said, so all your teachers, that's pretty rigorous, have had training in BAS. Well, we did it a couple of years ago. I said, so a couple of years ago, I said, you've had no new teachers? Well, we have a few. Okay, so do you have any PD before school begins? Because asking people to do this, I got trained to, like, oh. I said, so who makes it? They said, well, I think our PD plan is set. I said, who makes the PD plan? So one of them was there, the other we got on the phone call. Because I said, you cannot ask teachers to do something without putting in the conditions to have them be successful. So they had this conversation. And then we talked about, so, okay, I know they've had some PD, but they're still going to need support. So what else are we going to do? So we're going to design, we make sure that the literacy coach is going to model and support it. We've got a particular date, and we're going to support this. And then I said, that's probably still not enough. Like, well, we've got some staff meetings. We only have so many a year. I said, but didn't you say this is your priority? Like, this is your priority? Yes. I said, so who makes the decisions about still? Well, the principals were all there. Okay, so let's talk about this. So again, it's putting back, so what are the conditions we're going to put in place? Because I want to assess, and then how are we going to measure? So we talked about that and creating a Google form, really looking at teachers' confidence, because often I find greater reliability when you ask teachers their confidence, and if I ask, are you doing this? So how confident do you feel in your ability to implement the BAS into group students using existing data to identify a focus area? And we wanted them then after their PD days to just give that anonymously, because it's then up to you as a system to say, are we doing this well and putting the conditions in place for our staff? And this, by the way, is hyperlinked in the, see people taking pictures of it, into the slide deck that's in the shared drive for this session, okay? Yeah. And so then the other pieces is we really want to be, so we back mapped it, but I'm going to just pause here and do a turn and talk. So if you create an implementation plan that, yeah, this is what we want to see teachers do, because we think this is the evidence-based practice we've identified, we think it's going to improve literacy achievement. The goal then is to create the conditions on what the system, the leaders, the coaches are going to do to support it. And how are we going to gather data? We actually had coaching log data so that the coach was tracking how much time they're spending on this. And this isn't about a gotcha for the coach. This is a protection for the coach, because we want to make sure the coaching time is not tied in 10 different areas, organizing assessments, doing other things, that we're protecting the coach to focus on the priority area. And oftentimes we look at those logs and say, hey, system, we got the coach doing an awful lot of things. They can't focus on that priority area. We got to rethink some things. So, strategy, so this is the actions we're going to take, unpacking it. What are we going to do to create the conditions for success, and how are we going to assess, as a system, those inputs? So do a turn and talk, and I want you to think about what feels like this would help us build capacity. What feels like I want to take something from this. What feels like this would help us build capacity in putting those leadership practices and those professional learning from the school-wide, center-wide. So think about what your kind of your comment, your insight, your aha is right now, and do a turn and talk.
All right, I am going to ask that we have two people share out something that they thought about when they thought about the design of this plan and how it might be helpful for them. So can I get just two people to share something? No? Cat. All right. Meg's got.
I was volunteering Carrie.
We just talked about that importance of making sure those conditions are put in place to support whatever the priority is.
Get one more. Thank you.
We agreed with that, and then we also liked the ending piece of it, of the measurement of, is it serving its function? Is it hitting the things that we want it to hit? Are we being as intentional as we can be with it? And making sure we're all assessing it from our various viewpoints within our system.
That was a perfect transition. So just like when we speak to metrics, when we think about classroom level metrics, school level metrics, district level metrics, as an ISD, we are experimenting with some metrics of our own to say, how are we doing in knowing if we're supporting districts in ways that help this process move forward? So this is just one sample metric. And it's our attempt through the Literacy Essentials Oakland work to have just ongoing conversations with districts about what are the things that they've been able to accomplish. So they have these metrics. So this one starts with S. So it is one of our district system metrics. They intersect in different ways, but there's also a series of metrics that are specific to, that are more building level oriented, that start with L's and their leadership metrics. And then we have coaching metrics also, but again, that's about, is there support for the coach to do the work of coaching, not evaluation of the coach. So that's a pretty big distinction there. And so with this particular metric, and just because of the size of the font, I'll read it to you. The literacy leadership team with Oakland Schools team members and all district elementary principals agree upon professional learning plan inclusive of coaching support in light of existing district instructional materials in their literacy focus area. Okay, so they've selected a focus area. So this is a sample from a district. So this district said that they were, when you come back to this then more specific piece of this metric that we're coming back to, they talked about, well, have we uploaded our plan? And have we thought about putting those expectations into a state of action? And so you'll notice these are the kinds of things they said about their work so far. So yeah, the coach is invited and welcome to provide PL in that literacy focus area, but sometimes it's last minute. You know, I'm invited in, but I never kind of know when I'm going to be invited in, maybe to a staff meeting or something. But this is a district where actually all of their elementary principals are part of their literacy leadership team, and they go on to say, but our team is actually working to be more mindful and strategic with respect to how we work together and how we support teachers. And then specific teachers, they've said, you know, we can't coach everyone in a one-to-one cycle, but for specific teachers, we've identified those. They're not just new teachers. They're not teachers that we're seeing a deficit view of. There's actually a group of teachers that's piloting some new resources, and they were selected intentionally for a variety of reasons. They're part of what the group of teachers that are receiving more intensive coaching supports. So they were strategic of that, and they have committed to 80% of the time spent coaching is happening in their literacy focus area. And so they came back to, well, that's in progress. And then you heard Kehlani mention the coaching logs. So have you had a chance to sit down, review your coaching log data to see what's actually happening in practice and talk about what do we need to shift to better support teachers? Yep, it's happened. It happened on December 14th at our Cultivating Lasting Capacity session. And then finally with this last one, the literacy leadership team reviews the time spent to ensure the coaching time is valued and protected. So our coaches aren't being pulled, and if they are being pulled, what can we do to make some changes so that that coaching time is protected? And coaches have time not just to show up and be with teachers, but to be mindful and have time to plan for those interactions with teachers. So overall, their outcome rating for this particular metric, they said we are in progress. And then we did this, I think this was from Q2, and then they had Q3 and Q4 to continue to grow. And they're actually coming back and reflecting on these in about 3 weeks and saying, what have we learned this year? What does this set us up to do? And what are some different ways that we would like to work with you, our partners at the Intermediate School District, to support the work moving forward?
Thanks, Dana. So we're going to wrap up. It's almost 2:15. So much of what Kehlani and Dana, and I hope myself, have shared is this is really about the capacity, right? It's creating the conditions. So you just heard Dana say, create the conditions so that the coaches can do what they need to do. Create the conditions so the teachers can learn to improve their practice. And so that's the capacity part, right? So that's the conditions part. It's so that we can then foster growing the agency, right, of the individuals, collectively and individually as well. So when you think back to one of our first resources here around building capacity doesn't build capacity, we want you to just continue to think deeply when you think about your leadership team and how that intersects with planning intentionally for professional learning. What systems, what are you creating, right? What conditions are you fostering so that agency can then really flourish, right? With your leadership, with your teacher learning, your principal learning. And I when I say leadership, I always speak about leadership broadly because I don't define leadership by title or by position. I define it by action. So I'm going to charge you all as leaders to, continue to think deeply about the capacity, the conditions your systems are creating so that the agency can flourish. And that's really it. And we each gave you our emails in case there's something specific one of us mentioned or all of us mentioned that you just want a little more insight. When you do get access to the slides, you're going to notice a couple of the documents we gave you today in there as PDFs. You also have the link to that implementation plan on the one slide. So you'll have access to a few things if you want to break them out at a later time and share them back in your own organizations. And as I said before, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I think we're going to move back into the general session where Allison was speaking earlier at 2:30. So you've got about 15 minutes to kind of make your way back down there. But thanks so much and appreciate you and your commitment to this work.